Hello, greetings, Amherst Middle School. I'm Dr. LaRoche, and I am here with a special guest today for our look at climate change. We're here with Dr. Michael Mann. Hi, Dr. Mann.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, students, Dr. Mann is actually an Amherst, and are you an Amherst alum? Did you graduate from Amherst schools?
I absolutely did. Spent my whole life growing up in Amherst.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you join us back in Amherst virtually. Where are you today? Do you want to let us know?
Absolutely. I'm right in the middle of Pennsylvania, in State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State University is, where I teach.
And Dr. Mann is the director of the Earth System Science Center and was critical to helping people understand climate change. And so we would like to hear a little bit about your research and how you've helped us to advance our understanding of this important topic.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be with you virtually back in Amherst. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but some of my fondest memories are growing up and going to school. Back in the day, it was Amherst Regional Junior High School. Now it's the middle school, but this is the same school that I went to and where I first began to learn about science. Back in the I think it was the 8th grade, we had a course with a teacher named Charlie Devanzo, which was learning about the natural world, I think was the title of the course. And that's sort of where I first became introduced to science, to physics and chemistry and math and earth science. And ultimately, I went on to do my degrees in college in applied math and physics, went on to graduate school to study theoretical physics, and then got interested halfway through in sort of Earth's climate and understanding Earth's climate, using math and physics to model the behavior of our climate system. That ultimately took me down a road that led me right into the center of one of the most contentious issues we've ever dealt with, which is human-caused climate change and what we need to do about it. But I would say that the solid training that I got in math and science in the Amherst school system really prepared me to go on and pursue a career doing what I love doing. Trying to solve interesting problems, and so that's sort of my history, how I got into this, and you know, it's an interesting time because back when I was in high school, decades ago, you know, climate change seemed far off. It seemed theoretical. It seemed very speculative. Well, today that's no longer true because we can see the impacts of climate change playing out in real time in the form of unprecedented heat waves and wildfires and floods and superstorms. And I want to ask the students a question, if I might, because I was an Amherst Hurricane. I ran track and cross country and had one of those jackets that was emblazoned, one of those maroon jackets emblazoned with the Amherst Hurricanes moniker. Do any of you know why we're the Amherst Hurricanes?
That's an interesting question. So students and teachers who are out there watching on the YouTube channel, teachers can go ahead and respond in the chat to Dr. Mann's question. So the question is, do we know why we are called the Amherst Hurricanes? And I have been teaching here since 2003, Dr. Mann, and I actually don't know the answer. So I'm really interested. Let's see if anybody wants to put anything into the chat. It might take just a minute for it to come up.
No problem. I would say I would like to think it's because we were so ferocious and intimidating to other schools. But at least during my senior year, I don't think we won a single football game. So that's probably not the reason.
That's not it.
Well, it must be something else.
I have to show you that I'm wearing our new staff shirts, and it says sunshine mixed with a little hurricane, which is appropriate for our for our talk.
Well, and hurricane season just started 2 days ago, the official hurricane season. So what a perfect time to be talking about it.
So I'm seeing in the chat that Mr. Kelly is saying a hurricane came through here a really long time ago. Is that the reason?
Absolutely. It's the 1938 New England storm, which at one point was a Category 5 storm. By the time it reached Rhode Island, it had weakened to a Category 3 storm. But it basically followed the Connecticut River, right up the Connecticut River Valley, and made a direct hit on Amherst. And if you go online, if you Google the images, you will find images of total devastation of homes and barns, farms here, in Amherst, Massachusetts. So it was indeed this ferocious hurricane that gave us our name, the Amherst Hurricanes. Today, of course, we're seeing ever more intense hurricanes. We're breaking records, both for the strength of these storms, the intensity of these storms, and the sheer number of them. Last year, we had 30 named storms in the Atlantic hurricane season. We went halfway through the Greek alphabet. We've never done that before. So this is another profound impact that climate change is having. And here's the sort of cruel irony for New Englanders and for folks in Massachusetts and Amherst. One of the things that the science has led us to understand over the last decade is that climate change is not just causing these storms to become stronger because there's more energy. A warmer ocean provides more energy to strengthen these storms, to intensify these storms. But climate change is also shifting wind patterns. It's shifting the jet stream in a way that's causing many of these storms to track further north than they used to. So storms that would have made landfall in the past, say along the coastline of Georgia or the Carolinas or Jersey, are more likely to actually track north into New England. And so there's the possibility that we will see more of those ferocious storms like the 1938 storm that gave us our name.
Well, as a social studies teacher, I appreciate that history lesson, Dr. Mann, and I will definitely be exploring that. It sounds like our students also were some of the ones who contributed the answers. So students are writing also in the chat via their teachers. So they're sharing some things with teachers. So I really appreciate that, students, for your knowledge as well. And at this point, I want to allow for, I know Dr. Mann probably has some more things to say to us, but I want to just let teachers know if they can go ahead and collect any of the questions that students have for Dr. Mann and type them into the chat. We will try to address those in the next part of our segment. We have about 12 minutes left with Dr. Mann. So thanks very much. So Dr. Mann, you had talked about how when you first started your work, it was controversial. And in our civics work, in our school, we're kind of thinking about how do we take action, and what did you have to come up against, and how did you proceed to come up against that controversy? Because we don't always take action without any reaction.
Yeah, and it's sort of an interesting story. I was sort of a computer nerd in junior high and high school. In fact, I used to hang out in the computer room on Friday nights with my computer nerd friends, and we'd be doing computer programming and eating pizza. I guess we're not supposed to. Sorry, I let the secret out. Yes, we would order pizzas and bring it into the school. But that's so, I was sort of a geek, a nerd. The last thing I expected as I pursued a career in science was that I would find myself in one of the most contentious debates that we've ever experienced. But my work ultimately led me into the center of the climate change debate back in the late 1990s, when I was in fact pursuing a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of Massachusetts. I literally moved back home to do my postdoctoral research with a professor named Ray Bradley in the Department of Geosciences at UMass. And we published this curve called the hockey stick, which extended temperatures back 1,000 years, and it placed the modern warming in a long-term context. It allowed us to see how profound the warming trend that we've experienced over the past century really is, and how obviously it relates to fossil fuel burning, the Industrial Revolution, our dependence on fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels that's generating carbon pollution that's warming the planet. And because that science has implications for some powerful vested interests, the fossil fuel industry. The science tells us we need to move off of fossil fuels. We need to move towards renewable energy. And that proved a real threat to the fossil fuel industry. And they, in many cases, actually funded efforts to try to discredit and attack the science and the scientists. And I found myself right at the center of that. It's the last thing I expected. It's the last place I expected to be as a computer and science nerd who wanted nothing more than to be left alone in the computer room working on problems, solving interesting problems. But my science led me into the center of this very contentious public debate. And ultimately, I've come to embrace that role. Because it's given me an opportunity to inform the conversation about what is arguably the greatest challenge that we face as a civilization. And I feel privileged to be in that position, even though it's really not what I signed up for.
Thank you. And students have learned that that your emails were broken into, and they're curious about what happened to those people who broke into your emails. Did they get in trouble?
Did anybody hear yesterday that Anthony Fauci, public health expert, Anthony Fauci, who's been very instrumental in government efforts to confront the coronavirus pandemic, his personal emails were released through a Freedom of Information Act request. And it's sort of amusing to watch him go through that because, of course, many of us have gone through that. There have been all sorts of efforts to try to discredit us because of the implications of our science, implications that are inconvenient to, for example, some powerful fossil fuel interests. And so one of the means that they've used is literally to hack into, university web servers to steal emails. And they stole a number of my emails, many other scientists' emails, and they would take things out of context. For example, in science, we often refer, in fact, some of you probably have used the term, in your algebra homework or what have you. Hey, there's a trick to solving that problem. A trick in science and math means a clever but not obvious approach to solving a problem, a sort of shortcut, a clever sort of way around the problem. So it's a good thing. It's, scientists and mathematicians look for tricks to solving difficult problems. But if you take that out of context, hey, look, these scientists, they were talking about tricks. Clearly, they're trying to trick the public. They're lying about climate change. These are the sorts of attacks that we were subject to, again, because there were some powerful interests who wanted to see our work discredited. Ultimately, there were a number of investigations that looked into it, and there was no impropriety revealed by these emails. The only wrongdoing that was revealed was the criminal theft of the emails in the first place. But you have to grow a thick skin, and you have to be ready for these sorts of assaults if you're going to be a public figure in areas like climate change, where there is great conflict and contentiousness.
Thank you. Some of the students are curious about how you got your idea about the data collection that you did. Can you explain where your thinking started?
Yeah, thanks. So originally, my PhD research in graduate school actually didn't involve climate change. I was interested in studying very long-term cycles in the climate, oscillations in the climate record, long-term oscillations. And we were interested in understanding whether there are some very long-term natural oscillations. Well, the instrumental record of temperatures, thermometer-based temperature measurements around the world only go back about 1.5 centuries. So if you're interested in seeing if there are much longer term patterns of variation back in time, then those thermometer records aren't adequate. You need to try to extend the record back in time. And I ended up getting a postdoctoral fellowship from the Department of Energy that allowed me to come to the University of Massachusetts and work with one of the leading experts in the world in studying longer term records, which we call proxy records. That's Raymond Bradley in the Geosciences Department. And so we ended up looking at things like tree rings and corals and ice cores and lake sediments. In fact, I worked with another UMass professor, Julie Brigham Gretty, and a student of hers, Tammy Rittenauer. We were actually looking at lake deposits that go back thousands of years to try to understand the longer term patterns. And we had all of these records from different parts of New England that covered different time periods as the glaciers moved north at the end of the last ice age and left behind these lakes as they melted. There were these series of lakes, and you can look at the sediments, but there was a piece missing. We would have had a 4,000-year record, but there was one piece missing that we needed to fill in. And we finally determined where the optimal place to find those lake sediments was. It was the soccer field at the University of Massachusetts. We ended up drilling down through the UMass soccer field because that was a proglacial lake. That was once part of the glacial Lake Hitchcock that was left behind as the ice sheets melted. So we have these long-term records. I was interested in what they can tell us about the natural variation in climate. But when we piece together the puzzle of how the climate changed in the deep past, it gave us this result, the hockey stick shape, this dramatic warming of the last century, which is like the blade of a hockey stick. And so it had implications for climate change, even though it wasn't climate change that drove our interest in that work in the first place. And that's a lesson about science. It's sort of what I call a random walk. You don't really know where it's going to lead you. And we'd like to think that everything is well planned out in the project and you've got the grant and you know exactly what you're going to do. But in fact, it's just like life. You learn things along the way. Certain things don't work out. You get lucky. And sometimes science takes this erratic path. And so it's about using your mind, but it's also sometimes about following your heart and using your intuition as to where to go, what to investigate.
Thank you. That was really helpful. There are a number of questions here. We have a couple minutes left, around what actions people might be able to take to stop climate change. So, for example, question is, do trees help climate change more than solar panels? Is there a technology that can be used to stop storms? So, what are some actions solutions that you can talk about?
Yeah, great questions, folks. And I wish we had more time for Q&A. I should have spent less time talking and more time addressing your questions. Great question. There are so many things we can do, and there's no magic bullet. We need individual actions, of course, things that we can do to decrease our own environmental impact and our own carbon footprint. Bicycling rather than driving, if you guys aren't driving yet, but encouraging your family to use more fuel efficient transportation, changing your diet in a way that's climate friendlier, more vegetables, less meat. There are a million things you can do individually, but the most important thing you can do is use your voice and demand action. And part of the reason I'm optimistic that we are going to rise to this this immense challenge to avert catastrophic climate change is because of folks like you, the youth climate movement, kids your age who have marched out on the streets. I hasten to say, actually went on strike against school every Friday. I don't want you to necessarily do that, but they use creative ways of getting their message out because kids aren't in a position of authority yet. They can't make policies. They can't even vote. You guys can't even vote yet. And yet we are making decisions today that will have, great consequence for the world that you inherit. And so there's so many ways to use your voice and use it. Speak out about climate change. Make sure that the adults in your life are aware of the crisis that this represents and how it threatens your future in particular. And that's the most important thing you can do. Be the change, as Gandhi said, you wish to see in the world. I would say one more thing.
Oh,
One
go
more
for
thing,
it.
if I may. Good friend of mine, you guys might know, Bill Nye the science guy. Bill likes to say at the end of his, public presentations, he'll say, "Change the world." I like to tweak that a bit. Change the world for the better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mann. And I'm glad to hear you talk about those steps, because our students are, in fact, already engaged in those
Sure they are.
various using their voice, learning about the variety of solutions that people can take. And today's workshop is going to be continuing that. So we're doing an entire day here at Amherst Middle School where students are going to be attending workshops and learning about both the action steps in terms of using their voice and civics, as well as the science and the solutions. So we're bringing it all together in our day, and I'm so happy to have you be our kickoff for it. It was very appropriate to have not only an incredible and esteemed expert on climate change, but a graduate of Amherst Schools.
It was my pleasure.
Our very last. Thank you so much. Our very, very last question, and if you don't mind, I might send you some of the questions from the chat in an email, and we can maybe get back to the students later.
Sure.
The ones that we didn't get to, but I know you're busy, very busy, so we'll let you go in just a moment. But the last question is, what elementary school did you go to?
I went to Wildwood Elementary. I grew up on Wildwood Lane in a house just up on a hill, Wildwood Lane, right near the cemetery and the pond. And I would walk to Wildwood Elementary School every morning for kindergarten and then elementary school. So yeah, then we ended up moving later on other side of town, Sunset Avenue. Just down Amity Street from the town center, and the walk to school was much longer at that point.
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Mann, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to talk with us about climate change and your work. We truly appreciate it. And students, and teachers, you can go ahead and say thank you in the chat. I see that folks are already doing that. And we're going to get ready to move on. And I really just appreciate so much you taking your time out today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. LaRoche. It was great talking with you and with the students. And ARMS, you make us proud. Change the world for the better. Thanks, everyone.